When you think of climate change, what usually comes to mind? You might think of rising sea levels, natural disasters, or melting ice caps. But I believe what's often overlooked is how climate change affects cultural and social identity. Hello, my name is Olumisimi Owolabi, and I'm from Pennsylvania. Today, I want to talk to you about how climate change is affecting cultural and social identity. While many people view climate change as a distant threat, it is very real and it's currently impacting daily lives of communities around the world. I conducted a deep dive into two communities, the San people of Southern Africa and the Egyptian Nubians of Northern Africa, and synthesized my findings into a research paper and 4 podcast episodes. Before I begin my presentation, I want to shout out my mentor, Kristen Connor, for helping me over the past year and 2 months on this extensive project. My overarching research question was, how does climate change transform cultural and social dynamics in South and North Africa? Case study, the San people and the Egyptian Nubians. I chose these two groups because they are on opposite sides of the same continent. I want to add that important comparative aspect. How are they similar? How are they different? And that will provide insight into varied ways human cultures adapt to environmental change. This leads into my argument, which reads, climate change has altered culture, occupation, and gender roles within the San and Egyptian Nubian communities. Despite different contexts, both groups have adapted their traditional practices and adopted new strategies to cope with climate challenges. It highlights the need to understand these intersections to effectively address climate change's impacts. As I said before, looking at the cultural, occupational, and gender dynamics of the San and Egyptian Nubians shows how they adapted climate change. Their stories help us understand how different places shape who they are and how they find ways to deal with challenges, which can be important lessons for the future. So before I discuss my findings, I need to discuss my background research. So who are the San people and the Egyptian Nubians? What are their current climate conditions? And what are their experiences with colonialism, which I included because I think historical context is important. So the San people are indigenous hunter-gatherer groups found primarily in South Africa. They're renowned for their deep knowledge of the environment, and they face intensified drought and loss of traditional knowledge. Egyptian Nubians are an ethnic group indigenous to the Nile Valley region. Their culture and history is deeply tied to the Nile River, which provided water, transportation, fertile land for agriculture. They also face climate-induced problems such as water flow change affects the agriculture, which impacts local ecosystems and biodiversity. I think it's important to also acknowledge how colonialism plays a role in how climate impacts them. The San people, climate also exacerbates their already existing challenge with land dispossession. Pressures on land use and resources lead to conflicts over land rights. This happened with Western colonialism and is worsened by climate change. For the Egyptian Nubians, their resources have also been exploited by Western colonialism. These issues are worsened by climate change as the changing flow of the Nile and associated developmental projects have led to the displacement of many Nubians from their ancestral lands. To understand the ways their cultural and social identity is transforming due to climate change, I did a lot of background research, which I included looking at sources from the organization Greenpeace, South Africa Medical Journal, and much more resources from experts before contacting college professors and experts to interview and get a better understanding. After conducting background research, I formulated questions to ask the professors I contacted. Professor Robert Hitchcock on the left is an anthropologist who's been working with the San since 1975. Professor James McCann on the right is a historian who has done research in Africa, including Ethiopia, Southern Africa, Senegal, and Ghana, and does a lot of research on the region of the groups in the region surrounding Nile. While I won't share all their insights, I will share some of my favorite or more interesting points I learned while interviewing them. From Professor Hitchcock, I learned how healing dances declined, and that's not only integral to the San people's spiritual well-being, but also integral in maintaining social cohesion and passing down cultural knowledge. It's related to climate change in the sense that important sites for these healing dances may have become degraded due to the climate crisis and causing social disruption due to increased poverty and economic hardship. I also learned about the expansion of the mining industry. While mining did create job opportunities, it also led to environmental degradation and displacement, affecting local water supplies and traditional lands. worsening the challenges faced by the San in maintaining their traditional occupations. From Professor James McCann, I learned more about the significance of the Nile River. Nile provides 84% of Cairo's water supplies. It holds sacred value. Ancient Egyptians relied on the Nile for agriculture and provided fertile soil for crop cultivation. Adapted with community-based water management, they also adapted with community-based water management, and this involved community-led initiatives to optimize water use for agriculture and daily need. And this also included traditional knowledge and practices. They also adapted by adjusting cultivation methods and crop selections based on changing rainfall patterns, and they also adopted agricultural techniques such as improved irrigation methods or soil conversion practices to enhance productivity and resilience. So this leads to my comparisons. Are they more different or more similar? So I made a chart here comparing the two groups that had many similarities and differences. So some similarities is that they both have deep cultural connections to their environments, such as the Kalahari being central for the San people, while Egyptian Nubians consider the Nile more fundamental to their cultural identity. Both communities also struggle with displacement and land loss. As the San, for example, settle to restrict their traditional nomadic lifestyles now, while dams for the Egyptian Nubians, which exacerbate the effects of climate change due to altering the water flow, displace Nubian communities. Both communities have also implemented adaptation strategies to cope with the impacts of climate change. The San people have diversified their livelihoods, incorporating new practices like small-scale agriculture and tourism to supplement hunting and gathering. The Egyptian Nubians have embraced modern agricultural techniques to mitigate the effects of climate change on their traditions. Some differences include the geographical context. The San inhabit semi-arid and arid regions of the Kalahari, where drought and water scarcity are more primary concerns. For the Egyptian Nubians reside along the Nile River, where changes in water flow and flooding patterns impact agricultural practices. There are also changes differences in their occupational dynamics, as the San traditionally practiced hunting and gathering, while the Egyptian Nubians historically relied on agriculture along the Nile River. This means they had to alter their practices differently. So in conclusion, I feel the two communities share more similarities than differences in their relationship to climate change. My podcast is called The Culture and Climate Nexus. As a nexus is where 2 points meet. I chose a podcast to display my research so I can explore in-depth topics effectively and able to present my research and interviews in an accessible way. I split the podcast into 4 episodes. Introduction, an episode dedicated to San people, an episode dedicated to Egyptian Nubians, and a comparison episode. Professor Hitchcock and Professor James McCann are also featured on this podcast as well. It's available on my website, which I'll show you in a second. So if you want, you can either type in this link or you can scan on the QR code and you should be able to access my website. You can be able to see the homepage, the about page, the podcasts, and resources, which will have links to many different resources and will soon have the link to my research paper once it's completed. If you're at all interested in how climate change is impacting the cultural and social identity and how they're transforming these two groups' daily lives, I recommend you check out my podcast that has worked hard on it for the past year. The impact of my project includes increasing awareness about how climate change is transforming the community's everyday lives culturally and socially. Is used to also empower communities by sharing the stories of the San and Egyptian Nubians. This podcast and paper emphasizes their voices and encourages advocacy for their rights in adaptive strategies. It also encourages action as the findings promote a call for inclusive climate policies that incorporate indigenous knowledge, aiming to shape a more equitable response to climate change. Some things people like you and I can do is educate others and participate in climate workshops and activities. So if I ever want to pick up where I left off, something I could do would be conduct more research and visit communities firsthand, as a limitation of my project would not be able to engage with the actual people being affected by climate change here. Something else I could do is partner with local researchers and use more advanced tech for analysis, such as GIS mapping or remote sensing for more precise environmental monitoring. And Lastly, something else I could also do would be outreach to different communities and create educational materials and briefs for policymakers. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Olumisimi. This is an incredible presentation with so many interesting questions and that come up of just the intersectionality between all of these topics: climate change, colonialism, heritage, history, culture. We have two questions in the chat. The first is, how has this project influenced your thinking about what you might like to study at university?
Yeah, so what I want to study like at university would be anthropology and or environmental science, because I really am interested in how human cultures are being affected by climate change and the ways human cultures are continually evolving, and I just felt that really interesting.